In the cold depths of space, where civilizations rise and fall like distant stars, there exists a truth that most species learn too late. Never underestimate a human's capacity for defiance. Commander Zaratul of the Hegemony had executed over 300 prisoners across 17 worlds. She had seen them all, the proud warriors who died with honor, the cowards who begged for mercy, the silent ones who accepted their fate. But she had never encountered anything quite like the human who stood before her now, shackled and bloodied, yet somehow radiating an energy that made her ancient instincts whisper warnings she chose to ignore. What she expected was pleading. What she got instead would shake the foundation of an empire that had ruled the galaxy for 1,000 years. Sometimes the smallest spark can ignite the greatest fire. Sometimes that spark wears the face of a human who simply refuses to kneel. The execution chamber aboard the Hegemony dreadnought Eternal Dominion had seen countless final moments. Its walls, crafted from polished obsidian that reflected the fear in condemned eyes, had witnessed the end of rebels, pirates, and dissidents from across the galaxy. The Courtburg. Today, those walls would witness something unprecedented. Commander Zarathula stood 8 feet tall, her serpentine body coiled with predatory grace. Her scales shifted from deep purple to angry crimson as she studied the human chained before her. The creature was small by galactic standards, barely reaching her chest with pale skin marked by recent interrogation. Yet something in his posture disturbed her. Most prisoners slouched in defeat by this point. This one stood straight, his dark eyes meeting hers without flinching. "Marcus Chen," she spoke, her voice carrying the authority of 1,000 conquered worlds. Captain of the human vessel, Defiant Dream, convicted of attacking hegemony supply convoys, disrupting trade routes, and inciting rebellion among subjugated species. Marcus said nothing, but his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Zarathul had learned to read such micro-expressions during her centuries of service. This human was angry, but it wasn't the desperate rage of the cornered. It was something colder, more calculating. The chamber's other occupants watched the proceedings with varying degrees of interest. Subcommander Kethval, a massive insectoid whose mandibles clicked nervously, stood at attention near the viewing screen that would broadcast this execution across human colonies. The message was always the same. This is what happens to those who defy the hegemony. Dr. Yilan Trey, the expedition's xenobiologist, observed from her position near the wall. Her crystalline form refracted the chamber's harsh lighting into rainbow patterns across the floor. She had requested to be present to study human death responses for her research. The hegemony's understanding of human psychology remained frustratingly incomplete despite decades of occupation. "The charges against you carry only one sentence," Zarathul continued, circling Marcus slowly. Her massive form cast shifting shadows across his face. "Death by neural disruptor, to be preceded by public confession of your crimes against the rightful order of the galaxy." Marcus finally spoke, his voice steady despite his circumstances. "And if I refuse?" Zarathul's laugh was like breaking glass. "Refuse? Dear creature, you misunderstand your position. You have no choice in this matter. The confession will be extracted from you one way or another. The only question is whether you preserve some dignity in the process." "Dignity," Marcus repeated slowly, as if tasting the word. "Is that what you call this? Your entire civilization built on the backs of conquered peoples? Your rightful order that turns entire species into slaves?" The commander's scales flushed a deeper red. Few prisoners dared to speak with such insolence in their final moments. The hegemony has brought order to chaos, structure to a lawless galaxy. Your species' brief and violent history hardly qualifies you to judge civilizations that span millennia. Marcus looked around the chamber, taking in the assembled officers, the recording equipment, the ceremonial weapons mounted on the walls. When his gaze returned to Zarathul, something had changed in his expression. The anger was still there, but now it was tempered by what almost looked like amusement. "You know what's funny about bullies?" Marcus said conversationally. "They always think they're bringing order. They always think they deserve what they've taken. And they always underestimate the people they're trying to break." Zarathul's tail lashed with irritation. This conversation was not proceeding as expected. In her experience, humans were emotional creatures, quick to anger but equally quick to collapse when faced with hopelessness. This one seemed to be growing more confident with each exchange. "Your philosophy is irrelevant," she hissed. "You will confess your crimes, you will publicly acknowledge the superiority of hegemony rule, and you will die. These are facts, not negotiations." "Actually," Marcus said, and his voice carried a note that made several officers shift uncomfortably, "I have a counter-proposal." The chamber fell silent except for the subtle hum of the ship's engines. Zarathal stared at the human, unsure if she had heard correctly. "A counter-proposal?" Marcus nodded. "I challenge you to single combat. Traditional rules of engagement. Winner takes all." The silence stretched for several heartbeats before Kethvol's mandibles burst into clicking laughter. "The human has lost its mind. Commander, shall I proceed with the execution?" This creature clearly suffers from delusional thinking. But Zarathal didn't respond immediately. She was studying Marcus intently, searching for signs of madness or desperation. Instead, she found something that chilled her more than either would have. Absolute certainty. This human believed he could win. "You cannot be serious," she said finally. "You are chained, wounded, and facing a superior opponent. What could you possibly hope to gain?" Marcus smiled, and for the first time since entering the chamber, Zarathara felt a flutter of unease. "Simple. When I win, you release not just me but every human prisoner aboard this ship. You withdraw from the Kepler sector, and you acknowledge humanity's right to exist as a free species." Dr. Yilantre's crystalline form chimed with excitement. "Fascinating. The stress response is triggering grandiose delusions. Commander, this could provide valuable data about human neural breakdown under extreme conditions." "And when you lose?" Zarathal asked, ignoring the scientist. "When I lose," Marcus said, his smile widening, "you can have your confession. I'll publicly declare humanity's submission to hegemony rule, and I'll do it with such conviction that no human will dare raise a hand against you for a generation." The offer was tempting, Zarathul had to admit. Human resistance had been surprisingly persistent despite their technological disadvantages. A genuine confession from one of their most celebrated rebels broadcast across their colonies would be worth more than a simple execution. But there were protocols to consider. Combat challenges are only valid between recognized military equals. You are a convicted criminal. I'm a ship captain who's been fighting your forces for 3 years, Marcus countered. My crew has destroyed 6 of your cruisers and liberated 2 entire colony worlds. If that doesn't qualify me for recognition as a military opponent, what does? Kethval stepped forward, his insectoid features twisted with disdain. "Commander, surely you're not considering this absurdity? The creature is obviously attempting to delay its execution through legal technicalities." Marcus turned his attention to the sub-commander. "Scared your boss might lose to a lesser species?" The calculated insult had its desired effect. Kethvol's compound eyes blazed with fury, and his mandibles spread wide in threat display. "How dare you? The commander is a warrior of the highest rank, veteran of 70 campaigns. She could destroy you with her bare hands." "Then what's the problem with proving it?" Marcus asked mildly. Zarathul watched this exchange with growing interest. The human was manipulating the situation expertly, using her officers' pride against them. It was a level of psychological sophistication that their intelligence reports had consistently underestimated in the human species. "There are rules governing formal challenges," she said slowly. "Ancient traditions that even the hegemony respects. If you truly wish to invoke them, I do. Then you must understand the consequences. This is not a game with rules designed for fairness. It is combat to the death, with weapons of the challenged party's choosing. No mercy will be shown, no quarter given." Marcus nodded. "I understand." Dr. Yilantre moved closer, her scientific interest overwhelming her protocol concerns. "Commander, the psychological profile suggests humans often exhibit irrational behavior when facing extinction. However, this specimen's physiological responses indicate genuine confidence rather than desperate bravado." Most intriguing, Zarathul was facing a dilemma that hadn't appeared in any of her training scenarios. Refusing the challenge would suggest fear, something that could undermine her authority among the crew. Accepting it risked legitimizing human claims to military equality, something the hegemony had spent decades denying. But as she looked at Marcus Chen, standing chained but unbroken in her execution chamber, she realized that the damage to her authority might be worse if she backed down now. Word would spread throughout the fleet. The great commander Zarathul had refused a challenge from a bound human prisoner. Very well, she said, her decision crystallizing. I accept your challenge, Captain Chen. Combat will take place in 1 hour, in the ship's main arena. Weapons will be traditional hegemony blade staffs, as is my right as the challenged party. Marcus's smile grew broader. I look forward to it. As the guards moved to escort him to the holding cells, Marcus paused and looked back at Zarathul. Just one question, Commander. In all your years of conquest, how many opponents have you faced who actually wanted to fight you? The question lingered in the air long after the human had been led away. Zarathul found herself reviewing the battles of her career, the campaigns that had earned her reputation as one of the hegemony's finest warriors. She had fought rebellious governors, rogue military commanders, and desperate resistance leaders. But Marcus was right about one thing. They had all been fighting against her, trying to avoid or survive her attacks. None of them had ever actively sought out the confrontation. Kethvol broke her reverie. Commander, I must protest this decision. The human is clearly attempting to make a mockery of our traditions. Surely a summary execution would better serve the hegemony's interests. The challenge has been made and accepted. Zarathul replied curtly. Prepare the arena and notify the crew. They deserve to witness what happens when lesser species forget their place. But even as she spoke the words, doubt gnawed at the edges of her confidence. There had been something in Marcus Chen's eyes, a certainty that went beyond mere bravado or desperation. It was the look of someone who knew something she didn't, and that realization disturbed her more than she cared to admit. As the word spread throughout the ship, crowds began gathering around viewing screens and in the arena itself. It wasn't every day that a condemned prisoner challenged their executioner to single combat, especially not a human. The betting pools that inevitably sprang up among the crew heavily favored Zarathul, but there were whispers of uncertainty. Humans had proven surprisingly resilient since first contact. Their ships were inferior, their technology primitive, yet somehow they kept fighting when any rational species would have surrendered. They called it the human spirit, though most hegemony scholars dismissed such concepts as primitive superstition. In his holding cell, Marcus Chen sat in meditation, his breathing slow and controlled. The chains had been removed in accordance with combat protocols, and medical manites had been administered to ensure he would be in peak physical condition for the fight. It was another tradition the hegemony maintained. Honor demanded that victory come through superiority, not advantage. A guard brought him water and what passed for food aboard the ship. Marcus accepted both graciously, maintaining the polite demeanor that had characterized his interactions with the crew. It was yet another thing that set him apart from typical prisoners, who usually spent their final hours raging against their fate or pleading for mercy. Why? The guard asked suddenly. He was young, probably on his first deep space assignment. His translator rendered the question in heavily accented standard, the common tongue used throughout hegemony space. Marcus looked up from his meal. Why what? Why choose to fight? Why not just accept? It was a fair question, and Marcus considered it carefully before answering. Because someone has to show them that we're not afraid. Because every time we kneel, it gets easier for them to make the next person kneel. Because maybe, just maybe, there's a chance to change something. The guard nodded slowly, as if the answer made sense to him on some level he hadn't expected. As he turned to leave, Marcus called out softly, "What's your name?" "Jorik," the guard replied after a moment's hesitation. "Jorik Thane of the Mining Guild. Thank you for the food, Jorik, and for asking." As the hour approached, the arena filled to capacity. The main combat space was a circular pit surrounded by raised seating that could accommodate nearly 1,000 spectators. Holographic displays provided multiple viewing angles for those who couldn't attend in person, broadcasting the event throughout the ship and, Marcus suspected, to other vessels in the fleet. Zarathul entered first, acknowledging the cheers of the crowd with raised fists. She had changed into ceremonial combat armor that highlighted her impressive physique, while providing minimal actual protection. It was a statement of confidence. She didn't expect to need heavy armor against a human opponent. The blade staff in her hands was a work of art, its metal surface etched with the names of her victories. The weapon stood nearly 7 feet tall, with curved blades at each end that could cut through most known materials. She moved through a series of practice forms, demonstrating the grace and power that had made her legendary among the hegemony military. Marcus entered to a very different reception. The crowd's noise shifted to curious murmurs as he walked calmly to the center of the arena. He wore simple combat fatigues and carried a standard blade staff identical to his opponent's. His movements were economical, without the flashy displays that Zarathul had performed. But there was something in his bearing that commanded attention. The two combatants faced each other across the arena floor. Above them, the ship's captain served as official arbiter, his voice amplified throughout the space. By ancient law and honored tradition, this combat will determine the fate of the challenger, he announced. Victory grants all terms requested. Defeat means death and the forfeit of all claims. Are both parties ready? Zarathul raised her weapon. Ready. Marcus adjusted his grip on his blade staff and nodded. Ready. Then let combat begin. The crowd erupted as Zarathul launched herself forward with inhuman speed. Her first strike was a whirlwind attack designed to end the fight quickly, the sort of overwhelming assault that had broken dozens of opponents before Marcus could even react. But Marcus wasn't there when the blade arrived. He had moved at the last possible moment, not away from the attack, but around it, using Zarathul's momentum against her. His counterstrike was precise and economical, aimed at her exposed flank. She barely managed to deflect it, her expression shifting from confidence to surprise. The crowd fell silent as the two warriors separated and began to circle each other. That brief exchange had told them something important. This would not be the quick execution they had expected to witness. Marcus Chen, it seemed, actually knew how to fight. The arena had fallen into an eerie quiet broken only by the soft shuffle of feet on metal flooring and the whisper of air displaced by moving weapons. What had begun as a spectacle for the crew's entertainment had transformed into something none of them had expected, a genuine contest between equally matched opponents. Zarathul circled Marcus with renewed caution, her earlier confidence replaced by analytical focus. The human had not only survived her opening assault, but had nearly landed a killing blow in response. Her side still stung where his blade had grazed her scales, drawing first blood in what she had assumed would be a one-sided slaughter. Marcus moved with fluid precision, his blade staff held in a guard position that spoke of extensive training. His breathing remained controlled, his feet positioned for optimal balance and mobility. Most disturbing of all, his eyes never left hers, tracking her movements with the cold calculation of a predator rather than the desperate fear of prey. Impossible, Kethval muttered from his position in the command viewing box. Our intelligence reports indicated humans possess only primitive combat training. How does this creature demonstrate such skill? Yalantre's crystalline form chimed with scientific excitement. Perhaps our assumptions about human military capabilities require revision. This specimen clearly possesses combat experience far exceeding our estimates. In the arena below, Zarathul launched her second assault. This time she approached more methodically, using her reach advantage to probe Marcus's defenses with carefully measured strikes. Her blade staff wove through the air in complex patterns, each movement flowing into the next with deadly grace. Marcus responded in kind, his weapon meeting hers in a series of precise parries and deflections. Where Zarathul's style emphasized power and intimidation, his focused on efficiency and timing. He gave ground when necessary, absorbed impacts that he couldn't deflect, and waited for openings with patience that bordered on supernatural. The first such opening came when Zarathul overextended slightly during a particularly aggressive combination. Marcus stepped inside her guard and drove his elbow upward, catching her in the throat just below her armored collar. She staggered backward, gasping, and he followed up with a thrust aimed at her center mass. Only her superior reflexes saved her. She twisted aside at the last moment, the blade passing close enough to score another line across her armor. Her counterstrike was purely defensive, designed to create distance rather than inflict damage, and Marcus allowed her to retreat rather than press his momentary advantage. Why doesn't he finish her? Someone in the crowd whispered. The answer became clear as the fight progressed. Marcus wasn't trying to end the combat quickly. He was studying his opponent, learning her patterns, mapping her strengths and weaknesses with the methodical precision of a scientist. Each exchange taught him something new about how she moved, how she thought, how she responded to different types of pressure. Zarathal began to realize what was happening, and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the arena's temperature. The human was treating this fight like a puzzle to be solved rather than a battle to be won. It was a level of tactical sophistication that challenged everything the hegemony believed about human intelligence. "You fight well for a primitive," she said, attempting to provoke him into making a mistake. Marcus smiled without taking his eyes off her weapon. "Thanks. You're not bad yourself for someone who's spent the last century beating up farmers and miners." The insult hit home. Zarathal's recent campaigns had indeed focused on suppressing civilian populations rather than facing military opponents. Her legendary reputation was built more on intimidation than actual combat experience, a fact that Marcus had apparently deduced from her fighting style. She attacked again, this time with genuine anger fueling her movements. Her blade staff became a whirlwind of destruction, each strike carrying enough force to shatter bone and split steel. The crowd leaned forward in anticipation, certain that this assault would finally overwhelm the human's defenses. But Marcus had been waiting for exactly this moment. As Zarathul's anger overrode her tactical discipline, her attacks became more predictable. He began to flow around her, strikes like water, always a fraction of an inch beyond her reach, his own weapon darting out to score minor cuts whenever she left an opening. By the time her fury burned itself out, Zarathul was bleeding from a dozen small wounds while Marcus remained essentially untouched. The psychological impact was devastating. She had thrown everything into that assault, and it hadn't been enough. "How?" she gasped, falling back to catch her breath. Marcus lowered his weapon slightly, adopting a more relaxed stance. "You want the truth? You're good, Commander. Better than good. But you've been fighting scared populations for so long that you've forgotten how to face someone who isn't afraid of you." The observation stung because it was accurate. As her reputation had grown, serious opposition had become increasingly rare. Enemies surrendered rather than face her in battle. Colonies submitted without resistance, and her own skills had grown rusty from lack of genuine challenge. "Besides," Marcus continued, "you're fighting for the wrong reasons. You're fighting to maintain your reputation, to prove your superiority, to justify your empire's actions. That creates pressure, makes you hesitate when you should act, and overcommit when you should wait. And what are you fighting for?" Zarathal demanded. Marcus's expression grew serious. "The right of my species to exist, the freedom of every human being in chains aboard this ship, the hope that tomorrow might be better than today. When you fight for something bigger than yourself, fear becomes irrelevant." Around the arena, the crowd stirred uneasily. Many of them were from subjugated species, pressed into service through conquest or economic necessity. Marcus's words resonated with experiences they had tried to forget, dreams they had abandoned long ago. Jorik, the young guard who had brought Marcus his final meal, found himself nodding along with the human's words. His own people, the miners of Kepler, 7, had been absorbed into the hegemony after their government defaulted on a development loan. Technically, they were citizens, but everyone knew the truth. They were slaves with better living conditions. Zarathal recognized the shift in crowd dynamics and felt her position weakening. This human was doing more than fighting her. He was undermining the entire philosophical foundation of hegemony rule. If he continued speaking, if his words spread throughout the fleet, they could spark the kind of ideological rebellion that military force alone couldn't suppress. She had to end this quickly. Drawing upon reserves of strength and speed that came from decades of genetic enhancement and combat conditioning, Zarathul launched into the most devastating assault of her career. Her blade staff moved faster than most eyes could follow, striking from multiple angles simultaneously, creating a web of deadly metal that seemed impossible to escape. Marcus met her assault with something the crowd had never seen before: absolute serenity. His movements became a perfect expression of martial art elevated to its highest form. Where her attacks were violent, his were graceful. Where hers were forceful, his were subtle. He didn't try to overpower her strikes, but rather redirected them, turned their force against her. made her own aggression into his weapon. The philosophical difference between their fighting styles became a physical metaphor for the conflict between their civilizations. The hegemony sought to dominate through superior force, to break resistance through overwhelming power. Humanity, as embodied by Marcus Chen, fought by adapting, by finding ways to turn strength into weakness, by refusing to be broken no matter the odds. For nearly 10 minutes, the two warriors danced their deadly ballet across the arena floor. Neither could gain a decisive advantage, but slowly, inevitably, the tide began to turn. Zarathal's enhanced physiology gave her bursts of incredible power, but those enhancements came at a cost. Her energy consumption was enormous, and she was beginning to tire. Marcus, by contrast, seemed to grow stronger as the fight progressed. His technique became more refined, his timing more precise, his movements more economical. He was learning from every exchange, adapting to her style, becoming a better fighter with each passing moment. The crowd watched in stunned silence as their champion began to falter. Zarathal's attacks became more desperate, less controlled. She was still dangerous, still capable of ending the fight with a single lucky strike, but her window of opportunity was closing rapidly. Dr. Elantre observed the proceedings with scientific fascination. "Remarkable adaptation capabilities," she murmured to herself. "The human nervous system appears capable of real-time tactical evolution under combat stress. This contradicts established xenobiological models." Kethval, meanwhile, was calculating the political ramifications of what he was witnessing. If Zarathal lost this fight, if a human prisoner defeated one of the hegemony's most celebrated warriors in single combat, the implications would reverberate throughout the empire. Subject species would begin to question their subjugation. Military commanders would doubt their superiority, and the entire structure of hegemony authority could be undermined. He began quietly activating emergency protocols, preparing to override the combat results if necessary. Honor was a luxury they could no longer afford. In the arena, Marcus sensed that the climax was approaching. Zarathal was breathing heavily, her movements becoming telegraphed, her reactions a fraction slower than they had been at the beginning. But she was still incredibly dangerous, and wounded predators were often at their most lethal. "You cannot win," she panted between exchanges. "Even if you defeat me, my death will change nothing." The hegemony spans 1,000 worlds, millions of ships, billions of soldiers. One human's defiance means nothing against such power. Marcus deflected her latest attack and stepped back, creating space between them. "You're right," he said, much to everyone's surprise. "One human probably can't change the galaxy. But here's the thing about humans, Commander. We're never really alone." As if summoned by his words, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Emergency lights bathed the arena in pulsing red illumination, and automated systems announced hull breaches in multiple sections. The crowd looked around in confusion as the ship shuddered under what could only be weapons fire. "Impossible," Kethval snarled, checking his tactical displays. "We're in the middle of empty space. There are no human fleets within 50 light-years of this position." But even as he spoke, the main viewing screen activated to show the space around the Eternal Dominion. Dozens of human ships had appeared as if from nowhere, their hulls bearing the insignia of the Terran Resistance Fleet. They were smaller than the Hegemony Dreadnought, individually outgunned and out-armored, but there were so many of them that they filled the screen like angry hornets surrounding a giant. Marcus smiled as explosions bloomed against the ship's shields. "You're absolutely right that one human can't change everything. But you forgot something important. We're really good at making friends." The implications hit Zarathal like a physical blow. This entire scenario had been planned. The human's capture, his trial, his challenge to single combat. All of it had been designed to gather the hegemony fleet in one location while human forces maneuvered into attack position. She wasn't just fighting for her honor. She was fighting in the middle of the largest human military operation in the war's history, the Kepler Offensive, she whispered, recognizing the strategic brilliance of what was unfolding. While the hegemony had been focused on Marcus Chen's public execution, human forces had been positioning themselves for a massive coordinated strike against the fleet's primary base of operations. Around them, the arena shook with the impact of weapons fire. Emergency crews rushed to battle stations and the crowd began to disperse as survival instincts overcame curiosity. But Marcus and Zarathal remained in the center of it all, their personal combat now taking place within the context of a much larger battle. "Your move, Commander," Marcus said, raising his weapon once more. "But you might want to decide quickly. My friends don't usually wait around once the shooting starts." The Eternal Dominion shuddered as another wave of human torpedoes found their mark against its shields. Through the arena's transparent aluminum viewing ports, the battle raging outside painted the darkness with brilliant flashes of destruction. Hegemony cruisers wheeled through space like wounded beasts, trying to bring their heavy weapons to bear against the swarm of smaller human vessels that darted between them with suicidal courage. In the center of the arena, Marcus Chen and Commander Zarathul faced each other, while chaos erupted around them. The crowd had mostly fled to emergency stations, leaving only a handful of senior officers and essential personnel to witness what had become far more than a simple combat challenge. Zarathul's breathing was labored now, her enhanced physiology pushed beyond its design limits by the prolonged fight. Blood seeped through gaps in her armor where Marcus's precise strikes had found their mark, and her grip on the blade staff trembled with exhaustion. But her eyes still burned with determination, the pride of a warrior who had never known defeat. "Clever," she admitted, wiping purple blood from her mouth. "Sacrifice yourself to position your fleet for a decisive strike. Very human, very stupid." Marcus maintained his defensive stance, weapon ready but not aggressive. Around them, sparks showered from damaged lighting systems, and the deck plates vibrated with each impact against the ship's hull. "Not a sacrifice if it works." "But it won't," Zarathul said, her voice carrying renewed confidence despite her physical condition. "You may have achieved tactical surprise, but strategy wins wars. The hegemony has reserve fleets, backup installations, manufacturing capacity that dwarfs anything humanity can field. You'll win this battle and lose the war." Another massive impact shook the ship, this one strong enough to send both fighters stumbling. Through the viewing ports, they could see one of the hegemony escort vessels break apart under concentrated human fire, its reactor core painting space with brilliant nuclear fire. "Maybe," Marcus conceded. "But you're missing the point. This isn't really about military victory." Kethvol's voice crackled over the arena's communication system, distorted by battle damage and interference. "Commander Zarathul, report to the bridge immediately. We're losing structural integrity in 7 sections, and the human fleet has breached our defensive perimeter." Zarathul ignored the summons, her attention focused entirely on Marcus. Something in his demeanor had changed during the past few minutes. The careful calculation was still there, but now it was mixed with something else. Sadness, as if he was mourning something that hadn't happened yet. "What aren't you telling me?" she demanded. Marcus lowered his weapon slightly, no longer maintaining a combat stance. "This whole thing, the challenge, the fight, even the fleet action outside, it was never about defeating the hegemony militarily. We've known from the beginning that we can't win that way." The admission sent a chill through Zarathul that had nothing to do with the ship's failing environmental systems. "Then what?" "Proof of concept," Marcus said simply. "Demonstration that it could be done. That a lesser species could outfight, outthink, and outmaneuver the galaxy's supposed masters. Today's battle will be recorded, broadcast, studied. Every subjugated world, every enslaved population, every species that's been told they're inferior will see what really happened here." The psychological warfare implications hit her like a physical blow. The hegemony's power rested as much on the perception of invincibility as on actual military strength. If that perception cracked, if subject species began to believe they could resist successfully, the Empire would face revolts on 1,000 worlds simultaneously. "You're talking about civilizational suicide," she breathed. "The chaos that would follow the hegemony's collapse would consume the galaxy. Billions would die in the wars that followed." Marcus nodded grimly. "Probably. But they're dying now anyway, just more slowly and quietly. At least this way they die fighting for something better." Another impact, this one close enough to web cracks across the viewing ports. Emergency klaxons wailed throughout the ship as automated systems reported critical failures in multiple sectors. The Eternal Dominion, flagship of the hegemony's Third Fleet, was dying around them. Dr. Yilan-Trey's crystalline form chimed with distress from her observation position. "Commander, we must evacuate. The reactor core is showing instability patterns. This vessel will not survive another concentrated assault. But Zarathul seemed frozen, her weapon hanging loose in her grip as she processed the full implications of what Marcus had revealed. This human hadn't just outfought her. He had outfought the entire Hegemony Strategic Command. While they had focused on military solutions to the human problem, he had been waging a war for hearts and minds across the galaxy. "The prisoners," she said suddenly. "The human prisoners we've been holding. They were never meant to be rescued, were they?" Marcus's expression confirmed her suspicions. "They volunteered, knowing they wouldn't make it home. Their deaths will serve the same purpose as their rescue would have. Proof that humans value freedom over life, that will sacrifice anything to preserve the hope of something better." It was a level of strategic thinking that redefined everything Zarathul thought she knew about human capabilities. This wasn't the desperate thrashing of a dying species. It was a carefully orchestrated campaign designed to plant the seeds of revolution throughout hegemony space. "You magnificent bastard," she whispered, and there was genuine admiration in her voice. The arena shook again, more violently this time. Through the cracked viewing ports, they could see human fighters strafing the ship's hull, targeting specific systems with surgical precision. Someone had provided them with detailed schematics of hegemony vessel construction, another sign of the meticulous planning behind this operation. "Commander!" Kethvol's voice was edged with panic now. "The bridge has been evacuated. We're transferring command to the Auxiliary Control Center. You must come now." Zarathul looked at her blade staff, then at Marcus, then at the battle raging outside. For the first time in her long career, she faced a choice that would define not just her own fate, but potentially the future of galactic civilization. "Complete the challenge," she said finally. "Win or lose, we finish what we started." Marcus raised his weapon again, though his movements seemed reluctant. "Are you sure? Your ship is dying around us. Your fleet is being destroyed. You could surrender, live to fight another day." "Could I?" Zarathul asked. "Would your people accept the surrender of someone who spent decades enforcing their oppression? Would mine forgive the commander who lost the Third Fleet? There's no place for me in whatever comes after today." She attacked then, not with the desperate fury of earlier, but with the calm precision of a master accepting her final test. Her blade staff moved in patterns taught by centuries of martial tradition, each strike a work of deadly art. But she was fighting the current of history itself, and even the most perfect technique could not hold back the tide of change. Marcus met her assault with equal skill and greater purpose. Their weapons sang through the air in a symphony of conflict. Two warriors giving everything they possessed, in service to causes larger than themselves. Around them, the ship continued its death throes, but in the arena's center, time seemed suspended in a moment of perfect combat. The end came suddenly. Zarathul's exhaustion finally overcame her will, her guard dropping for just an instant. Marcus's blade found the gap between her armor plates, sliding between her ribs with surgical precision. She looked down at the weapon protruding from her chest with something approaching surprise. "Well played," she said, blood frothing on her lips. "But this won't end the way you think it will." Marcus supported her as she fell, lowering her gently to the arena floor. "Maybe not, but it ends with hope, and that's something the galaxy hasn't had for a long time." Zarathul's eyes were already losing focus, but she managed one final question. "What happens to my crew? The ones who survive this?" "Same thing that happens to everyone else," Marcus said. "They get to choose who they want to be in the world we're building. Some will fight us to the end. Others will join us. Most will probably just try to find a place where they can live in peace." She nodded weakly, then looked toward the viewing ports where the battle continued to rage. "I hope you're right about this being worth the cost. A lot of good people are going to die before this is over." "I know," Marcus said softly, "and I'll carry that weight for the rest of my life." But the alternative was watching them die slowly, a generation at a time, until there was nothing left worth saving. Zarathul's grip on his arm tightened one last time. "Promise me something. When this is over, when you've won or lost everything, remember that we weren't all monsters. Some of us genuinely believed we were bringing order to chaos." "I'll remember," Marcus promised. Commander Zarathul of the Hegemony Third Fleet died with her eyes fixed on the stars, where human and alien ships continued their deadly dance among the cosmic Her last words were lost in the sound of another torpedo strike against the ship's failing hull. Marcus stood alone in the center of the arena as emergency systems flickered around him. Through his earpiece, he could hear the voices of the human fleet coordinating their assault, confirming objectives secured, reporting casualties taken and inflicted. The battle was turning in their favor, but the cost was proving as high as he had feared. Jorik appeared in the arena entrance, his mining guild uniform replaced by human resistance colors. Behind him came a squad of human soldiers, their weapons trained on the remaining hegemony personnel. "Captain Chen," Jorik called out. "Are you injured? We need to evacuate immediately. This ship has maybe 10 minutes before total structural failure." Marcus looked down at Zarathol's body, then at the officers who had witnessed their combat. Kethvol stared at him with undisguised hatred, while Dr. Yilantre seemed fascinated by the implications of what she had observed. "The terms of the challenge," Marcus announced loudly enough for all to hear. "I won, which means all human prisoners aboard this vessel are to be released immediately. The hegemony doesn't honor bargains made with terrorists," Kethvol snarled. Marcus smiled, and it wasn't entirely pleasant. "The hegemony doesn't exist anymore, at least not as you knew it. But that's okay. My people are here to collect the prisoners anyway." As if summoned by his words, more human soldiers poured into the arena. The evacuation proceeded with military efficiency, though it was clear that saving lives was a higher priority than taking prisoners. Hegemony personnel who surrendered were treated with professional courtesy. Those who resisted were dealt with swiftly and decisively. As Marcus was escorted toward the evacuation shuttles, he paused at one of the viewing ports for a final look at the battle outside. The Eternal Dominion was burning from stem to stern, its mighty weapons silent, its proud banners replaced by the expanding clouds of atmosphere, venting from dozens of hull breaches. Around it, the remnants of the Third Fleet were scattering to jump points, abandoning the field to the human forces. It wasn't the complete victory that propaganda would later claim, but it was enough. The hegemony had been shown to be vulnerable, and that knowledge would spread across the galaxy faster than any fleet could travel. "Sir?" Jorik appeared at his shoulder, young face marked by the strain of his first real combat. "The shuttle's ready for departure. We've recovered all the human prisoners, plus about 200 aliens who requested asylum." Marcus nodded, still looking out at the stars. In the distance, he could see other battles beginning as hegemony reinforcements engaged the human fleet's rear guard. The war was far from over. If anything, today's victory would provoke an even more violent response from the Empire's core worlds. But seeds had been planted. Images of this battle would reach subject worlds throughout hegemony space, carrying with them proof that resistance was possible. Some species would rise in rebellion immediately. Others would wait for more favorable circumstances. A few would remain loyal to the Empire that had given them stability and order. All of them, however, would know that they had a choice. As the shuttle pulled away from the dying dreadnought, Marcus allowed himself a moment to mourn Commander Zarathol. She had been a worthy opponent, a warrior shaped by the system she served but not entirely defined by it. In another time, another place, they might have been allies rather than enemies. "Captain?" The shuttle pilot's voice broke his reverie. "Where are we heading?" "The fleet's preparing to jump to our fallback positions." Marcus settled back in his seat, closing his eyes as exhaustion finally began to claim him. "Home," he said. "We're going home. And then we're going to change the galaxy. One world at a time." Behind them, the Eternal Dominion finally succumbed to its wounds, its reactor core breaching in a flash of light that briefly outshone the local star. The explosion took with it not just a ship, but the myth of hegemony invincibility that had kept 1,000 worlds in chains. In the aftermath of that light, something new began to grow. It would be messy, violent, and uncertain. Many would die in the chaos that followed, but for the first time in centuries, the galaxy's enslaved peoples could look up at the stars and believe that freedom was possible. And sometimes, Marcus reflected as the shuttle jumped to hyperspace, that belief alone was worth any price.